is being used as a replacement for animal therapy in nursing homes, which is really kind of awesome.
So she built planets on Earth, you guys.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Museum of Science Boston and our very special event tonight, Sleep and Our Mental Health. I'm James Monroe. I'm the Senior Producer of Adult Programs and Theater Experiences here at the museum, and I'm thrilled to welcome you all to this really special event. A huge thank you to everyone who's here in person. Thank you for coming out and braving the snow flurries and joining us here in person in Connors Theater, and a huge hello to all of our friends who are tuning in at home on Zoom. Thank you for joining us virtually for this evening of conversation at the intersection of sleep and the brain. And tonight is a collaboration with our friends from the Harvard Brain Science Initiative. This is a partnership we started in the fall with a program called Digitizing Dementia in our Omni Theater. And we're really thrilled to be continuing this collaboration tonight and welcoming two of their researchers to our stage to talk about their groundbreaking work. And tonight is also a part of our ongoing mental health spotlight here at the museum. For the past 6 or 7 months, we've had programming on all of our stages around mental health. We've hosted a mental health temporary exhibit. We've had even a mental health themed weekend. And so tonight's conversation is just a part of that work and that initiative promoting our belief that mental health is health. And tonight is a part of our current winter-spring season of adult programming as well. We still have an incredible lineup to go. Every week, basically now through the end of May, we have a different event or experience happening here at the museum for 18-plus audiences. So I encourage you to check out our lineup by going to our website at mos.org/adults, or you can pick up our season mailer on your way out as well on the tables downstairs. Now, at the end of the conversation tonight, our panel will have a chance to take questions from all of you. So if you have a question for them at any time, you can submit that by pulling out your smartphones, whether you're here in person or watching at home, and going to slido.com, that's SLIDO.com, and enter the code SLEEP. We kept it very simple for you tonight. And we'll try to get through as many of those as we can a little bit later on. I need to thank our friends from the Lowell Institute for their ongoing support of the adult programming. It is because of them that we are here tonight and that this event is free for all of you. So a huge thank you to everyone at the Lowell Institute. But now it's my extreme pleasure to welcome out to the stage our moderator for the evening and a wonderful colleague of ours here at the museum. Insoo Hyun is director of the Center for Life Sciences and Public Learning at the Museum of Science and an affiliate of Harvard Medical School's Center for Bioethics. Insoo has been interviewed frequently on National Public Radio and has served on national commissions for the Institute of Medicine and the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine. Recently, Insoo was appointed to NextRac, a federal advisory committee that provides recommendations to the NIH director and a public forum for the discussion of social issues associated with emerging biotechnologies. And tonight, he's here to lead this conversation. Please join me in welcoming Insoo.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us, both here in person at Connors Theater and also online. As James said, I'm Insoo Hyun, and it is my job here at the museum to bring some of the most interesting, cutting-edge work being done in the Boston and Cambridge area directly to you, the public. Now, he also mentioned that we had this mental health spotlight over the past several months, and our goal for the mental health spotlight is not only to shine a light on pathologies and research around pathologies related to mental health, but also to get the message out that mental health is simply health. It's not just pathology in the most extreme cases, but it's also about what we can be doing in our daily lives to maintain our proper mental health. Let me ask you here at Connors Theater, just a quick show of hands. How many of you had a good night's sleep last night? I'm going to put my hand down because I did not. Okay, good. Congratulations. How many of you would like to get more sleep than you're getting now? I'll put my hand up for that one. And how many of you think that there's a possible connection between sleep and mental health and you'd like to learn more? Well, what an incredible coincidence, folks, because that's a topic for today. And I'm going to first introduce our first speaker. Our first speaker is going to just talk to you very briefly about his research, and then we'll have a second speaker do the same. I'll sit down with them for a short while to just kind of have some conversation, and then I'll open it up to questions that come from you. Okay? So Our first speaker is Dr. Michael Murphy, and he is a staff psychiatrist with the McLean On Track program. This is a program for first episode psychosis, and he's a research fellow as well at the Stanley Institute for Psychiatric Research at the Broad Institute, and he's also assistant professor of psychiatry at Harvard Medical School. So please welcome to the stage Dr. Michael Murphy. Michael.
Hi.
Great to have you. Great to have you.
Great to be here. Thank you so much for that nice introduction. My name is Michael Murphy, and tonight I'd like to talk with you a little bit about some of the connections between sleep and mental health, with a particular focus on sleep and depression. Just a little bit about me to begin. I got my MD and my PhD at the University of Wisconsin, where I studied the basic neurophysiology of human sleep. After graduating, I came out to Boston to do my adult psychiatry residency at the Massachusetts General Hospital, McLean Hospital Adult Psychiatry Residency, where I was chief resident of the acute psychiatry service at Mass General Hospital, which is perhaps the busiest psych ED in the country. After graduating, I stayed in town and took a position at McLean, where I work in the On Track program, which is a program for really college-age young adults who have mental health struggles and are trying to get back into school, back into work, stuff like that. And I maintain an active research program and am an assistant professor of psychiatry at HMS. So before we begin, I think it's important that we have some common background knowledge about sleep. And so what do we know about sleep? Well, our scientific knowledge of sleep is still very much a work in progress, but there are a few things that we can say with a reasonable degree of confidence. First of all, we know that while sleep is likely doing all sorts of things, at least some of the things that sleep is doing, it is doing for the brain. And we know this in part from our own experiences. If you've ever spent the night lying awake in bed, not sleeping, the odds are you didn't feel particularly rested the next day. And in fact, if lying in bed awake was enough to feel rested, then we wouldn't have problems with insomnia. So sleep is clearly doing something for the brain. The second thing to know about sleep is that sleep is highly regulated, and there's two main regulators of sleep. The first one is called the circadian drive, and that's the top picture there. So on the horizontal axis is time, and the vertical axis is sleep pressure, or the amount a person wants to sleep. The little suns indicate day, and the little moons indicate night. And all the circadian drive means is that we humans like to be active and awake during the day, and we like to sleep at night when it is dark out. The second main driver of sleep is called the homeostatic drive, and that's the picture just below with the same axes. So horizontal axis is time, vertical axis is sleep pressure. The black areas are when someone is asleep, the white is when they're awake. And what the homeostatic drive means is that the longer an animal or a person is awake, the more they want to sleep. And when they're finally allowed to sleep, the more they will sleep. The next thing that is important to know about sleep is that sleep is not a unitary phenomenon. It's not one thing. It's lots of things happening together. About 100 years ago, scientists realized that if you tape electrodes onto someone's head, you can record information about the electrical activity going on in the underlying brain tissue. This is a photo of a colleague of mine from graduate school wearing a cap made out of lots of these little sensors, and this is called an EEG cap. And if you do this to somebody when they get into bed, the signal looks like this. So this is a little squiggly line. The horizontal axis is time, and the vertical axis is voltage, or amount of electricity. So it's a pretty fast squiggle. As the person sinks into a very light sleep that we call N1 sleep, what you notice is that the squiggle begins to slow down. As they sink even deeper into a sleep that we call N2 sleep, the background activity slows down even further, and then you also get these bursts of really fast activity that are called sleep spindles. The person sinks into an even deeper sleep that we call N3 sleep, and the EEG signal changes entirely. Now the whole thing is dominated by these big, slow oscillations. Finally, the EEG changes one more time and begins to look a lot more like the waking EEG, but the person is still fast asleep. And we call this REM sleep. And as it happens, people oscillate between these sleep stages. They go in between them roughly every 90 minutes or so over the course of the night. And it's important to know that these are not just like squiggles on a screen. These actually have really important behavioral and biological correlates. For example, if you wake somebody up during REM sleep, they are far more likely to report having been dreaming than if you wake them up during, say, N3 sleep. So given that background knowledge, what can we say about sleep and depression? Well, one thing we know is that for many people, sleep is the very first thing to go wrong. So this is data from both initial episode and recurrent depression. The light bar graph bars are when people had insomnia before they had depression. The kind of intermediate is when the depression came first, and the dark gray is when they happened at about the same time. So what I want you to get from this picture is that regardless if it's your first episode of depression or your 50th, sleep disturbances happen for most people before depression appears. But not only is sleep the first thing to go wrong, it's also the last thing to get better. So this is data showing recovery from depression. On the horizontal axis, we have time, and we have three different kind of measures here. The green measure is a depression measure, and the blue and red are different sleep measures. And what you see is that this depression measure drops off really nicely. People are feeling better after, 8, 12 weeks. But the sleep measures stay elevated. People still are not sleeping well, even though they're feeling much better. Furthermore, people with depression sleep differently than people without depression. So this is something called a hypnograph, and this shows the transition between sleep stages over the course of the night. So again, horizontal axis is time, vertical axis is sleep stage, and you see the person start off in wake, sink down into N1, N2, N3, bounce up into REM, which is labeled in red, and then kind of go through that cycle every 90 minutes over the course of the night. Now, the bottom hypnogram is from somebody with depression, and there's a few things that we've consistently seen. First of all, that little A indicates the time until the first REM episode, and in depression, that time is much shorter. These people get to REM sleep much more quickly. And then the B is the length of the REM episode. These people stay in REM for much longer. So over the course of the night, they tend to have much more REM sleep. Finally, we know that many of our antidepressants actually affect REM sleep directly. So this is data looking at 5 commonly prescribed types of antidepressants. SSRIs are things like fluoxetine or Prozac, citalopram or Celexa. SNRIs are venlafaxine or Effexor. TCAs and MAOIs are older antidepressants we don't use quite as much anymore. And this is data from a study where they were trying to look at the effect of acute administration versus chronic. But the main point is that these medications tend to decrease REM. So again, people with depression have lots of REM, and our antidepressants tend to decrease REM. So because people with depression have different sleep than healthy controls, and because our medications can affect sleep, a lot of people have asked, well, can we do something with sleep to impact depression while people are awake? And it turns out, maybe. So most people, if you keep them up all night, feel pretty bad. However, for some people, sleep deprivation, keeping them awake, can have a really powerful antidepressant effect. So this is data from 2 groups of depressed patients, and the blue are the non-responders and the red are responders. And in this study, they kept people awake overnight, and they gave them a depression questionnaire every hour. And what you can see is that the people in the red line, the responders, their depression scores go way down after not sleeping for a night, whereas the people in the blue line, if anything, perhaps feel slightly worse. The other thing to know about this effect, though, is that once people are allowed to sleep, they have this recovery night, that antidepressant effect immediately goes away. So this is not really sustainable. You cannot keep people awake indefinitely. People get tired, they make mistakes in driving, stuff like that. And so people have looked to see if we can do more subtle modifications of sleep, to see if we can change different things about sleep to improve waking. And this is a study that's been going on, this is a field that's been looked into for about 40 years with kind of mixed results. But this is one result from a colleague of mine in graduate school where he used sound tones to very subtly manipulate sleep. So someone would be deeply asleep and he'd play this tone and it wouldn't wake them up, it would just bump them up a little bit in their sleep depth. So they'd go from N3 to N2. And what he found was kind of mixed. There were some people who responded really well to this and actually had a decrease in their depression scores, but there are other people who did worse or stayed the same. This is an incredibly deep topic, and I could talk for easily an hour about this, but I think I'm going to leave it here for now. Thank you.
Well, that was fascinating. I'm really looking forward to the discussion later and also fielding your questions for Michael. Our next speaker is Alen Juginovic. He is a medical doctor and a postdoctoral researcher in the Department of Neurobiology at Harvard Medical School. He works in the field of sleep medicine. He's also a teacher at Harvard College, where he teaches a course called Neurobiology of Emotions and Mood Disorders. Alen, can you please come out here? Ta-da!
Thank you so much.
We have
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Good evening, everyone. And thank you so much for having me and Michael here. I think it's a great pleasure for both of us to present our research and in generally the connection between sleep and mental health. So we can start with my story, actually very selfishly, very quick, my story. So I'm originally from Croatia, a very small country that you can see here, very small but very beautiful country in Europe that you can see here, and definitely you should visit if you haven't yet. And I obtained my medical doctorate there in Croatia, where I also did with my fantastic team of young physicians, young scientists, and medical students, loads of extracurricular activities. And I just want to show you a few pictures of these, basically where we organize conferences which gathered more than 2,000 people overall, now 9 Nobel laureates in Croatia from more than 30 plus countries. So it was a fantastic experience, and we still organize these conferences in Croatia, and the next one is in September. So that's an excuse to come to Croatia. But in 2020, just with the pandemic, basically I came to Harvard Medical School, not the perfect timing, but still, February of 2020, I came here for a few weeks and then lockdowns and everything. But nevertheless, we kind of managed to go through that, and here I study the effect of poor sleep quality on health in animal models, primarily mice. And I'm just going to give you a brief introduction, just basically continue what Mike was saying about why sleep is so important. I mean, the first kind of take-home message I want you to really remember is that sleep is really not a passive state. Most people think about sleep as you go to bed 7, 8, 9 hours and you lay down and then you wake up and you wasted your time. But sleep is nothing similar to that. It's actually a state where some of your regions of the brain are more active compared to being awake. I want to emphasize here that the relatively optimal number of hours of sleep for adults between 18 and 65 years of age is 7 to 9 hours. But the important thing is during the night, what Mike was mentioning, and in continuity. So it's not the same sleeping 4 hours and then 3 hours during the day versus 7 hours during the night. And here, just a very brief overview of the regions, some of the regions that are actually involved in sleep regulation. The only region I would like you to remember is the green region in the middle, which is called the hypothalamus, and a small group of neurons within the hypothalamus that's called the suprachiasmatic nucleus. That's where your clock, body clock, internal clock, which regulates your sleep and wake, is actually located. The hypothalamus, the suprachiasmatic nucleus. Sleep is important for numerous functions, including memory, including cognition. Many studies have shown, and probably most of you have experienced, that when you sleep poorly, your memory is not quite at 100%. Your cognitive abilities, your concentration, your alertness is also not at 100%. And what's more, productivity is obviously not at 100%, but poor sleep also has a pretty big impact on the economy. Studies have estimated that the lack of energy and tiredness associated with poor sleep actually costs businesses in the US around $150 billion annually. So poor sleep actually costs a lot. Poor sleep is also a pretty big causative agent for stress. When you sleep poorly, you're more stressed out, you're more anxious, your mood is generally lower. And when you're more stressed, you're more likely to sleep poorly again. So you end up in this vicious circle between sleep and stress. One report said that around 40% of adults report lying awake at night due to stress at least once in the past month, which is a huge number. Stress caused by poor sleep or in general is associated with various other disorders such as stroke, cardiovascular disorders, diabetes, and others. This is just a simple kind of image where I summarized some of the more important disorders that are associated with poor sleep, apart from various psychiatric disorders, depression, anxiety, which Mike talked about. I'm just going to add here cardiovascular disorders, cancer, specifically colorectal cancer and breast cancer. Those two types are primarily associated with poor sleep. Various neurological disorders such as dementia, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's disorders, and others. And interestingly, people who sleep poorly tend to gain more weight compared to those who sleep normally. Why? Because the hunger hormone, as we call it, ghrelin, actually increases in people who sleep poorly, and that makes them eat more, whereas the satiety hormone, leptin, actually decreases, so they eat more and actually gain weight. And of course, one very important thing to say about poor sleep, especially in terms of drivers, is that many car accidents per year are associated with a lack of sleep or poor sleep in general. My research on sleep deprivation at Harvard Medical School in Dragan Aroguda's lab actually studies the impact of poor sleep quality on health in animal models. More specifically, in the last few slides, couple of slides, I'm going to show you what my colleagues actually published just before I came, because this is one of the most important stories that we're going to talk about tonight. So you can see here, these are all organs of the very simple and very humble fruit fly, which actually sleeps. Sleeps during the night, is awake during the day, more or less. In the 4 or 5 rows, you can see various organs: the brain, the muscle, the fat body, think of it as the liver of the fruit fly, the testes, and the gut. And you can see here clearly 2 images that stand out in the last column, in the gut column, the red, yellow, and kind of orange images. Those images are actually of sleep-deprived fruit flies. And the more red, orange, and yellow the image is, the more oxidative stress there is in the gut, or in any organ, specifically here the gut. And oxidative stress is a very harmful process that can harm cells and actually kill them in the end. So what they found, actually, the lab found that when you sleep-deprived fruit flies, oxidative stress develops only and specifically in the gut, in the small and large intestine. The same thing here can be seen in mice. So you can see in various columns various organs of the mouse, but only in the first column, primarily in the first column, in the small intestine, after only 2 days of sleep deprivation, the 3rd row, you can see that there's oxidation present in the gut. You can see reactive oxygen species, as we call them, present there. And at 5 days, it's even worse. The same gut is involved in lack of sleep, as in the fruit fly, in the mouse too. And finally, I just want to show you probably the most impressive chart here. So, and somebody might ask, so why is this even important? So fruit flies develop oxidative stress, mice develop oxidative stress in the gut, so what? So this is the what. So you can see here, we're just going to look at the first kind of graph here. You can see the gray lines here is the lifespan of fruit flies who live normally. On the horizontal axis, you can see the number of days of life, and on the y-axis, on the vertical axis, you can see the percentage of flies that actually survive up to that specific date. So flies generally live around 35, 40 days, the gray lines. When you sleep-deprive fruit flies and they develop oxidative stress in the gut, you look at the very bright red lines. Their lifespan is cut by 60 or 70%. And the fascinating part is, when you feed those same fruit flies, when you sleep-deprive them, but feed them antioxidants orally in the food, and you remove oxidation from the gut, you actually are looking now at the dark brown or dark red line, meaning that those flies without sleep and without oxidation in the gut live roughly the same as normal flies who sleep a completely normal life, who sleep completely normally. So that's the what. Sleep, oxidation in the gut decreases the lifespan in the fruit fly. And now we obviously want to see, is that actually present in mice, and more importantly, in humans? Do humans who develop severe insomnia actually also develop oxidative stress? And can that oxidative stress in the gut be a trigger for various other disorders, cardiovascular, neurological, psychiatric, or many others? And I would just like to thank fantastic lab members who are just fantastic people and helped me a lot, just when I came here in 2020, and helping me currently on my projects. And just wanted to show you my car with which I drive every day to Harvard Medical School. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. I'd like to invite both speakers up here, and I'll get a little bit of conversation started, and then I'll turn it over to the audience. So let's get some of my questions out of the way. So you both noted the importance of sleep to our lives, and Can you share a little bit further how important a good night's rest is for our overall health and maybe even our lifespan? What happens when we sleep that makes it so vital that we get enough sleep for the health of our brains, for the health of our bodies? Just explore that a little bit further, and just the importance of sleep.
That's such a great question. And, sleep is really complicated. So it's not just enough to sleep a certain number of hours a night. You have to have sort of good quality sleep. And for all the studies that show that people who don't sleep long enough have bad health outcomes, there are other studies that show that people who sleep too long have bad health outcomes. I think that sleep is likely the final common pathway for all sorts of processes in the body. So if there's something that is disrupting the body, high blood pressure, other sort of kind of physical illness, that can manifest as disrupted sleep. And of course, if you're not sleeping enough, then your body is not able to do the things that it needs to do during sleep, and that can lead to all sorts of bad outcomes. At the same time, sleep does change over the course of life, and that is totally normal. So as people age, they tend to need less sleep, and they tend to sleep less deeply. And that's not something people should necessarily be concerned about. It's just the way the body changes with time.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's so fascinating. While I was studying in Croatia, we proposed to our dean, speaking of differences in sleep duration in adults versus older maybe people versus younger people. We proposed to our dean that actually schools should start at 8:30. Why? Because biologically, right? Biologically, teenagers actually tend to feel sleepy later during the night. That means if you start school at 7, they're going to get less sleep, less concentrated. And actually, studies have found out that that these teenagers who sleep poorly actually perform worse in academic tasks, in exams, and all of that. And he didn't accept our proposal, by the way, but that's a whole nother topic. But it was actually based on science. And I can probably touch upon a few other maybe topics that poor sleep is associated with, especially neurological, I feel like, illnesses such as dementia. I think the last number I saw was that people who sleep poorly, and when we say, I think both Michael and I, when we say sleep poorly, I think most of the time we mean a long period of time, not maybe a day or two to increase the risk of these disorders. So that's years instead of sleeping 3 days poorly, and then you're not really, very likely, not likely to develop some neurological disorder. But yeah, Parkinson's disorder, very, very interesting that people who sleep poorly are more likely to develop Parkinson's. Alzheimer's disorder is the most prevalent form of dementia. I think that's a fascinating topic in itself. I can just finish off with I would say probably the leading hypothesis behind why poor sleep is associated with Alzheimer's. So there was a study maybe published 5 or 10 years ago, I forgot, that actually showed that the brain flushes away, I can say trash from the cellular metabolism during deep sleep. Flushes it away primarily during deep sleep. So when you don't sleep, or when you sleep poorly or you don't sleep enough, you're going to get less deep sleep and less opportunity to flush away that cellular the byproducts of cellular metabolism, which are going to build up and can actually increase the risk of Alzheimer's disorder.
I found it fascinating that on the one hand, sleep deprivation may be somewhat beneficial for people with depression, but on the other hand, clearly detrimental for gut health and overall health. Is there a way in which maybe some of your research trajectories can sort of overlap or cross over? Do you think what you do can inform what Alen does, and maybe Alen, what you do can inform some of Mike's work?
I think definitely. There's an increasing understanding across all areas of medicine that inflammation and reactive oxygen species are related to inflammation is the final, thank you. So I was saying that reactive oxygen species are linked to inflammation, and inflammation is a final driver of so many different illnesses, including depression and other psychiatric illnesses. And so that's sort of one low-hanging fruit I could see.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what Michael's doing is really fascinating and so informative. At least, for my research, he's an expert in the field of psychiatry, psychosis, and all of that. I can of course learn a lot from his research, and I really think that everything kind of has to have some sort of common pathway, at least partially, because everything has to, in the end, make sense and be connected. So I think, we're learning from other researchers, from Michael, from other researchers in the field of psychiatry. My research, at least, and other people's research for sure, can benefit a lot from it.
Michael, are there things that people try to do to improve their sleep that could actually be harmful for them?
Yes, definitely. So that's a pretty complicated question, and I don't want to give medical advice here, but sleep medications are complicated drugs that have complicated effects, and certainly there's all sorts of over-the-counter medications people take that are also complicated. I think that there's really good evidence for behavioral interventions to help with sleep, things like CBT, things like not looking at your phone, using blue light filters, stuff like that is unlikely to be harmful. But once you start taking a pill for sleep, then you are assuming a different set of risks.
Great. And Alen, is there a connection between sleep and cancer? Because you were talking about kind of like these big systemic impacts, but what about cancer?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and actually we're going to study that in the lab very, very soon. So very, very many epidemiological studies have noticed that, in particular, colorectal cancer and breast cancer are associated with poor sleep. And why maybe one of the reasons for that could actually be oxidative stress for colorectal cancer in the gut, because oxidative stress, DNA damage, oxidative stress, cellular damage overall can actually increase the risk of colorectal cancer, for example. And I would say the opposite is also, it's not really the opposite, but the other part, it's not only short sleep that's associated with cancer. Overly long sleep, so more than 9 hours, more than 10 hours per day, has been associated with poorer outcomes in general in oncological patients. So the optimal kind of balance is 7 to 9 hours, as I mentioned, for adults, and that should be kind of a golden standard that most people, I think, should try to sleep.
So, Michael, I had asked Alen about connection between something big like sleep and cancer. Is there a connection between sleep and schizophrenia?
There is, and I've actually prepared a couple slides about that.
I was not at all canned, by the way.
So I just think this is a really interesting and deep association. So sleep, memory, and schizophrenia are all linked. As it turns out, sleep is related to memory, and sleep helps strengthen and kind of lock in memories through a process called consolidation. This is a figure from a paper from two researchers here at Harvard Medical School, Dara Minogue and Bob Stickgold. And what they did is they taught people to type a sequence of numbers, okay? So with their fingers, you were typing numbers. And they counted how many times they could successfully do this over the course of a block of time. And so what you see is that people get better at this. They start out not great, but they practice and they get better, and then they kind of plateau. But then they had the people take a nap and come back and do it again. And what you see in this blue line is people get better. They weren't practicing in between, they were just resting, but they actually got better at the task. And this is because of consolidation. This process, as it turns out, is related to sleep spindles. Sleep spindles were those little fast bursts of activity during N2 sleep. This is a scatter plot showing basically the number of sleep spindles and how well people improved after sleeping. So there's some relationship there. As it turns out, people with schizophrenia have problems with this memory consolidation. So the red line here is people with schizophrenia. And what you see is they kind of start off near the healthy controls. They improve a little bit as they practice, but then when they go and sleep, they don't get any better from sleeping. They come back and they actually do worse, and they are far behind the healthy controls. People with schizophrenia also have fewer sleep spindles. So this is work that I was involved in grad school. This is a picture of EEG data, and all these little circles are people's scalps. The little triangles are the nose, and each black dot is an EEG electrode. And these are different measures of sleep spindles. And what I want you to get is that there are these like red, strong, powerful colors in the healthy controls, where in people with schizophrenia, it's blue and pale. So they have much fewer sleep spindles. And there's one more piece of the story that I did not put on the slide, which is that sleep spindles are controlled by a particular calcium channel in the part of the brain called the thalamus. And people with schizophrenia have more variability in the genes that encode this calcium channel. So what's interesting scientifically about this is that this is a story that links a genetic marker, this gene polymorphism, to a protein, this calcium channel, to an EEG signal, this sleep spindle, to an actual behavioral outcome that is important for people with psychiatric illness. So that is the connection between sleep and schizophrenia that I think is worth knowing about.
Great, thank you. I love the questions that have been coming in, and please ask your questions on Slido. So I want to turn to the questions that you're asking. And it almost feels like ask the sleep expert time, right? So here's a great question from Irving. Can you ever make up a sleep debt? So can you first like explain what is a sleep debt, and can you ever pay that off?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, unlike financial debt, I mean, yeah, so sleep debt, it often happens in younger people. I mean, it can happen, of course, in any age range. But most of the time, you can think about sleep debt as people sleep poorly during the workday, so Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and then all of a sudden they try to sleep. They obviously accumulate sleep debt because they sleep 5 hours or 4 hours or 3 hours or whatever, and then they accumulate that sleep debt, which obviously you have to pay back, and they usually try paying it back over the weekend, but over the weekend, most young people actually go and have fun in the evening, right? Or maybe older people go and have fun too. And then you accumulate sleep debt even more and even more. And that phenomena actually is also called social jet lag, when your social interactions and social life is not really aligned with other people's social life, the timing of it, right? Because you wake up at noon instead of 9 a.m. or 7 a.m., and then you kind of miss that part of the day, and then you go to sleep maybe later, and so on and so forth. But in the end, we had, so I didn't even mention, so I worked in a hospital in Croatia with patients with psychiatric and neurological illnesses, mostly treating them with a paradigm called personalized sleep medicine, where we actually try to find the right drug for the right patient at the right dose at the right time. And many actually people, especially with depression, came and they had very poor sleep. And you try to fix poor sleep with various sleep hygiene methods, various sleep hygiene techniques, try to align their circadian rhythm, circadian clock to the right clock. It is difficult, at least from my experience, but you can, in the end, actually pay down sleep debt.
These are terrific questions. So here's another question from Olivia. Should you sleep in complete darkness, like using a blackout curtain or eye mask, or should the sun naturally wake me up?
It's a great question.
I think it's a great question, and also a question that's really hard to answer. I think the more in line you are with the natural world in general, that's where your body evolved to exist. But I think that it's one thing to wake up with the sun in the morning, but you're going to be under artificial light most of the day, staying up late at night. So I think that for each person, the solution to how to best sleep is very much an individual solution. It's what works best for you, what gets you the most kind of restorative sleep. And that's not going to be constant. It's going to change with the demands of your life and your work. And it might also change with the demands of people you are sleeping in the same room as. And you have to figure it out. There's no single right answer.
Yeah, and I can just add, there was just a study published, I think even a few days ago, about wearing a sleep mask, an eye mask, during sleep. And they actually, showed that people who wore, so none of the participants ever wore a sleep mask, right? And then they had two groups, people who wore a sleep mask versus those who didn't wear a sleep mask for only 2 days, right? And then they showed in the group that wore an eye mask, a sleep mask, that they had actually improved their alertness during the day and cognitive skills, which I found quite surprising, and actually also published that, like a summary of that on my social media channel. And the author actually reached out to me, and then we chatted about that study, and they're pretty convinced it works. I'm like, this is pretty interesting, so maybe we should start recommending sleep masks to people.
So we've got daylight savings coming up on Sunday. What are your thoughts on daylight savings time? Either of you.
Well, I mean, I can probably start. I don't have any strong opinion, to be honest. I've heard both sides, that some people, are for, some people are against, but I don't really have any strong opinion on that. So,
I can say that daylight savings time is complicated, and I think that complication is not what you want when you're talking about sleep. You want to keep things kind of consistent, and there are these natural rhythms. In psychiatry, we see a lot of spike in depression around changes in the season, in particular going into winter. And I think that, perhaps by living a little bit more in tune with what's going on in the natural world, we can maybe blunt that to some degree.
People are very interested in the mice and the fruit flies, Ellen. How do you keep the mice and the fruit flies awake?
So the first question I get is, do fruit flies sleep at all? And why do you even use fruit flies? How relevant are they for human studies, right? So fruit flies sleep, and it's a relatively simple method of how we keep them awake and the mice awake. So we have a few methods. So for fruit flies, we have two primary methods. So one is very simple, and that's you put a fruit fly in a vial, right, in a small bottle, many fruit flies, and then you shake them on a shaker, right? So you shake them, and then they don't sleep. But then the question will be, how do you even know if they sleep? I mean, they don't close their eyes, do they, right? So they actually sleep. So there's a consensus around this. So if the fruit flies are not moving for more than 5 minutes, that's considered that the fruit fly's asleep. And we have these little tubes where you put fruit flies, and they have each of them maybe has 2 or 3 laser beams. And when the fruit fly moves across the laser, you can see that the fruit fly is moving. That means the fruit fly is awake. And the other method, apart from just mechanistically shaking them, is you can genetically engineer certain neurons in the brain that get activated only at a specific temperature. So you genetically engineer a fruit fly, which is relatively simple. Then you put the fruit fly in a room that's at 29 degrees usually. So that's when these neurons get activated, and the fly actually genetically or neuronally doesn't sleep. So that's pretty strong effect. And for mice, it's a very simple method. So in mice, we have a circular cage with a rotating bar at the bottom, right? So the bar gently pushes the mice around and prevents them from sleeping. But I will say that mice sleep still around 35 or 40% of the time, although that is very fragmented sleep. They try climbing on the bar, and then they sleep for a minute, and then they fall off the bar, and then they don't sleep. So it's very fragmented sleep. So it's not really full sleep deprivation, rather partial towards full sleep deprivation.
Michael, is there a difference in the quality of sleep that you reach naturally versus using sleep meds or other things?
So, yes, I think that's true. So if you give somebody a sleep medication, it's going to affect the way those squiggles look on the screen. So if you give somebody a benzodiazepine or something like Lunesta, you're likely to have more of these sleep spindles than they would if you didn't give them that medication. We don't really know what that means, but we also have lots of clinical data about various, we call them parasomnias, or unusual behaviors in people who are taking these medications, things like sleep eating, sleepwalking, stuff like that. So I think that getting sleep is important, and I think that medicated sleep is better than no sleep, but it is different in ways that we don't fully understand from natural sleep.
This is a great question. Maybe either of you can answer this. For those who might be forced to sleep less time, new parents, medical residents, for example, is there anything that these people can do to improve the quality of the few hours of sleep that they do actually get?
I wish I knew, as a
Bad
former
news,
resident
folks.
and former young parent. Yeah, definitely not. I will say that in those situations, it becomes extremely important to have good sleep hygiene. So really, not look at your phone in bed, not have the lights on. If you need to be in a dark room, be in a dark room, and really consolidate your chances to sleep, which is basically the underlying backbone of most therapies for insomnia, is teaching yourself to sleep when you have a chance to sleep.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, sleep hygiene is so important, yet sometimes really kind of ignored, I would say. And they are very, very good, sleep hygiene practices. I can probably name a few. Apart from keeping the room relatively dark, although I agree with what Michael said, it's really individual. But generally, I'm just speaking generally, keeping the room dark, keeping the room cool, having a quality mattress, quality pillow, because not every mattress is good, or not every pillow is good. Waking up ideally in the morning without the alarm clock, ideally waking up naturally, but that's not really possible. Ideally not waking up in one of the deeper stages of sleep, because then most likely you're going to feel what's called sleep inertia, meaning you're going to feel kind of tired, confused when you wake up. It's going to take a bit of time for you to fully kind of wake up. So yeah, the sleep hygiene, not using the phones, mobile phones, any sort of screens, 30 or 40 or maybe even an hour before going to sleep, if possible. So we also started working with athletes, elite athletes, and it's quite difficult. Sleep in athletes is, as you can imagine, some of these clubs have an incredibly dynamic work schedule and travel schedule, and it's quite difficult for the athletes to get enough sleep. So we work on certain techniques to help them sleep better.
So along the lines of sleep hygiene, is it important to go to sleep at the same time at night?
Yeah, so that's one of the main, I would say probably one of the main ideas behind sleep hygiene is that ideally you would have a regular sleep schedule, sleep and wake schedule, regardless of the day. So is it Sunday or Saturday or Monday? You're gonna go to sleep at 11, wake up at 7, and have a regular sleep schedule. So that definitely helps.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I would say, too, that is a special challenge for people who work shifts that are off kind of the 9 to 5 shift. And there's a lot of research showing that those people have an elevated risk of all sorts of bad outcomes related to their disrupted sleep.
Yeah. So I'm going to direct a question then about schizophrenia. Why do people with schizophrenia oversleep with negative symptoms? And what about psych medications that might cause you to oversleep?
A lot of the psych medications for schizophrenia, the antipsychotics, are really, really sedating. And part of that is by design, and part of that is by accident. So people with schizophrenia often sleep huge amounts in response to medication. At the same time, the negative symptoms you mentioned in schizophrenia, those are things like amotivation, avolition, apathy, alogia, which means kind of limited speech. So there's a sort of decreased drive. And so if you have people who are taking these really sedating medications, and then also because of their illness have sort of less drive or less energy, it's a real recipe for having people spend lots of time in bed, lots of time sleeping or kind of being in bed and not sleeping.
Mm-hmm. This is a question from Patrick. What are the top disruptors of sleep for individuals? Alcohol, late meals, sugar, etc. Curious about what other triggers there might be to target behaviorally.
Yeah, all of the above. All of the above. So yeah, definitely. I also part-time I worked in a sleep clinic in Croatia, and there you would have ideally try to make the environment as ideal as possible for people who sleep, and not eating, especially some heavy meal before sleep, at least a couple of hours before sleep, not drinking alcohol before sleep, smoking, or even exercising right before sleep. So studies have found mixed evidence regarding exercise. So some studies claim that you can actually exercise a couple of hours before sleep and your quality is going to be fine. Others say it's not going to be fine, so I'm not really sure. But definitely, I think it makes maybe sense not to exercise 30 minutes before you go to sleep. Some sleep relaxation techniques, some people, this is just anecdotal evidence that they told me, taking a warm bath, relaxation, especially relaxation techniques in general. So not looking at your email 10 minutes before you go to sleep because your boss is gonna maybe say something which is gonna make you stressed and you're not gonna be able to fall asleep. Not really watching, ideally, some very stressful content on TV or reading any stressful content, which is quite difficult in today's world, unfortunately. So yeah, those are maybe I think the most simplest kind of things to ensure or increase the likelihood of good sleep. If you want to add something.
The only thing I would add to that is if you're lying in bed and it's been half an hour and you're not sleeping, you should get out of bed. There's no point to lying in bed not sleeping. You kind of teach yourself that bed is a place for sleep by not being in bed when you're not asleep.
Very interesting. So a pair of questions have come in that really nicely complement each other. So the first question is, does sleep serve a different biological purpose in early life, let's say in newborn babies?
We know that newborn babies sleep a lot more. We know they have different amounts of these sleep stages, the REM sleep and the non-REM sleep. I don't think we really know the answer to that question. Certainly we have good data that sleep is related to memory and different kinds of sleep do different kinds of memory. And babies are learning so much so rapidly that it stands to reason that they are using a lot of that memory processing ability of sleep. But beyond that, I think it's very much an open question.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with what Michael said. And one of the ideas is that the baby's brain is still developing. And one of the ideas is as the brain develops, the baby starts to get a more regular sleep rhythm. But why is that the case? We're not sure. I can even ask a question. Why do we sleep 7 to 8 hours? Why do elephants sleep, I think, 2 hours or something like that? Giraffes, 2 or 3 hours. We're not really sure, right? The main purpose of sleep. So Michael and I think, noted quite a few of these disorders that are associated with poor sleep. But what's the kind of main function of sleep? You know, in one sentence, it's quite difficult for me. I would say we're not really entirely sure. I don't know, maybe.
I would agree with that.
Yeah, we're not entirely sure, right? But it's certainly very important, but we're not entirely sure. And that's why we're doing these studies to try to find out.
So do older people need less sleep? Is that true? And if so, why?
So it does seem to be true from these large-scale studies that people tend to sleep less as they age, and they don't have clear evidence that it's causing all sorts of bad negative outcomes. But it's complicated too because the geometry of the head and the brain change as people age. And so things that are picked up on the EEG as sleep in a young person, that same brain activity might actually look like quiet waking depending upon the person. But even with that caveat, there is still good evidence that people sleep less as we age. And we don't really know why, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the hypotheses that I've read relatively recently is that, you know, as people age, certain neurons start dying off because that's just normal biological process. And just because of that, the balance of certain neurotransmitters such as serotonin or dopamine is slightly maybe imbalanced, if I can put it that way. And that's one of the ideas why older people, I don't know if the right word is need less sleep or just sleep less, not really entirely sure. So yeah, that's I think what I can add here.
Well, my final question for tonight for the two of you is, for all of us, what steps can we take starting now in our own sleeping patterns to improve the quality of our sleep? What are some concrete things we could focus on?
I suspect we would agree on this, but I think we probably would both say sleep hygiene is the biggest thing. And that's all the stuff that we've been talking about. So,
yeah, absolutely. I mean, sleep hygiene, just having a relatively dark room. So first of all, I think the most important thing here is to understand how important sleep is for health, right? In general, long term, right? Not just feeling bad tomorrow, but you know, you don't want to increase your risk of colorectal cancer by 30% in the next 10 years. You just don't want to, right? So that's the first thing. And then, you know, sleep hygiene, dark room, not eating, drinking, smoking, or ideally exercising, I guess, before sleep. Quality mattress, quality pillow, cool room, regular sleep schedule. What Michael mentioned, when lying in bed for 10, 15, 20 minutes, you're just not falling asleep, get out of bed, maybe, you know, sit on the sofa or in the balcony or somewhere, and then get back to bed. And I think snoozing the alarm isn't helping in the morning either. Ideally, you would wake up in some shallower sleep stages of deep sleep, but that's very difficult to do.
One thing I might add too is to really be mindful of napping during the day.
Right.
So naps longer than about 20 minutes, you begin to go down that path of these sleep cycles. And that is not good because your brain thinks you're going to have a full night's sleep. And if you wake up after about an hour, you're totally off. And you've kind of disrupted those sleep drives. So short naps can be okay, but long naps are often harmful for sleep.
That's a great point.
Very interesting. Well, at this point, I'd like to invite James to come up. But thank you so much for this very interesting topic and interesting conversation. Thank you for these terrific questions. We couldn't get to all of them. Many of them came in, but hopefully we got a nice smattering.
Let's have a huge hand for our panelists, please. Thank you so much for being here, Alen and Michael. I've learned so much about my sleep hygiene. I'm doing so much wrong. And Insoo, thank you for leading this brilliant conversation. Thank you to our friends at the Harvard Brain Science Initiative for this ongoing partnership and making tonight possible. And thank you to all of you for spending your Tuesday night with us. We're going to say goodnight to our friends who are watching online.